I stepped out of my car, the soft crunch of gravel under my heels announcing my arrival with less fanfare than I had imagined. The air was warm, slightly sticky, carrying the faint smell of barbecue and freshly cut grass, that weirdly nostalgic scent that immediately drags memories into your chest like uninvited guests. I paused for a moment, adjusting the strap of my bag and smoothing the crease in my jacket. Just long enough to notice the reunion venue itself, a hall decked out with balloons and banners that proclaimed "Welcome back, class of 2010" in cheerful, over-enthusiastic fonts. It looked like every reunion ever, all eager smiles and the kind of generic decoration you find in Pinterest tutorials titled "Throw a Reunion on a Budget." I took a deep breath, trying to summon the calm confidence I'd rehearsed in front of my bathroom mirror countless times. Yet, stepping through the doors, I was met with the sort of silence that could suffocate. People were talking in clusters, laughing, pointing at decorations, sipping wine, and yet nobody turned to look at me. I wandered among them, smiling politely, offering nods, half smiles, casual hellos that hung in the air and dissolved immediately. It was like shouting into a vacuum. At first, I laughed quietly to myself, because how else do you respond when the universe decides to give you a cold shoulder without even trying? I imagined a small pop-up caption over my head saying, "Unrecognized and fabulous." Or maybe, invisible, but stylish. There was a twinge of amusement, the kind that snakes down your spine with a little shiver, a tickle of ironic satisfaction that I didn't need their recognition to validate my existence. My entrance alone was my subtle mic drop. Still, I moved deeper into the room, brushing past familiar faces, or at least, what I thought were familiar faces. People who had once passed me notes in class or laughed at my questionable jokes, now transformed into strangers with polite smiles and polite distances, their eyes darting over me as if I were a mildly interesting piece of abstract art rather than a former peer. The lack of acknowledgement stung more than I expected. Not in a dramatic, tear-jerking way, more like stepping on a Lego barefoot in the middle of the night, shocking, momentarily painful, and slightly absurd. I caught a glimpse of a group clustered around the buffet, someone animatedly pointing at a tray of mini quiches while recounting an inside joke I didn't recognize. The scene made me pause. I realized I was witnessing a sort of parallel universe, the same people I once knew, yet entirely reshaped by time, success, choices, and perhaps luck. I chuckled softly, imagining the captions if someone took a candid photo of me now, lost and found in 10 years, literally lost. I wandered toward the wall, where a few framed photographs of the graduating class were displayed. The faces stared back at me, frozen in black and white smiles, and I felt an odd sense of camaraderie with those younger selves. Funny, I thought, how life keeps moving, and we end up strangers to the people we once knew best. My fingers brushed the corner of a frame, and I caught the scent of old paper and dust, like time itself had trapped a whisper in there. I considered slipping out, pretending I had forgotten something in my car, but something deeper, something quiet and mischievous kept me rooted. This wasn't about revenge. Oh no, I didn't need it. Their silence, that brief, puzzled stillness when they couldn't place me immediately, was already its own delicious retribution. It was the universe's subtle applause, the kind that whispered, "You exist, you're still here, and you've changed." I moved toward a small gathering by the drinks table. My heels clicked lightly against the polished floor, the sound a little louder than I expected, and I realized how hyper-aware I had become of every step, every breath, every slight twitch of my lips. The casual mingling around me seemed almost cartoonish, like those awkward corporate mixers you see on TV, the kind where people are slightly too polite, slightly too eager to fill silences with meaningless chatter. I took a sip of sparkling water, letting the bubbles tickle my throat, and smiled to myself, imagining it as a tiny victory toast. Here's to being unnoticed until spoken. And then I let my eyes drift across the room, absorbing the nuances, the casual lean of someone's shoulder, the way a few were sharing inside jokes I no longer understood, the shimmer of laughter that wasn't meant for me. It was oddly comforting. I didn't feel hurt or excluded. I felt like a spy in my own life, observing the familiar rendered unfamiliar. Life had given me front row seats to my own story, and the best part was, nobody knew I was the protagonist just yet. A waiter passed by, offering tiny skewers of caprese and meatballs. I grabbed one and took a bite, savoring the strange combination of basil, tomato, and mozzarella, mingling with a slightly tangy balsamic drizzle. It was like tasting a memory of sophistication I never cared to cultivate back then. I chuckled to myself again, how appropriate that my first greeting at the reunion was a bite-sized morsel of grown-up delight, literally more refined than any of our adolescent self-consciousness could have imagined. And so, standing there, invisible but wholly present, I let the moment stretch, a quiet, teasing lull before the inevitable discovery. Their lack of recognition wasn't a slight, it was a prelude. I inhaled slowly, feeling the air settle in my lungs, the faint hum of conversation washing over me like white noise. A tiny, ironic thrill tickled the back of my neck. I didn't need revenge. No, their silence when I introduced myself, or more accurately, when I hadn't yet, was enough. Somewhere near the center of the room, I caught a glimpse of someone I thought I remembered from sophomore year. Their posture froze slightly as they turned their head. I didn't react. I let the moment linger like the final note of a soft piano piece, knowing the real crescendo was still to come. And as I stood there, quietly smiling at my own shadow of familiarity, I realized that sometimes the most satisfying victories don't roar, they whisper. I drifted further into the room, letting my gaze skim over the clusters of people like a gentle current brushing over stones in a shallow stream. Faces that were once so intimately familiar now appeared as fragments, eyes slightly too bright, smiles too rehearsed, voices that had grown sharper or huskier, like their histories had been rewritten in fonts I didn't recognize. I felt a mild vertigo, the kind that comes from realizing your past is a museum exhibit, and you're both visitor and artifact. At the far end of the hall, I spotted a circle of old classmates animatedly discussing what looked like career milestones or life updates. I didn't quite catch the words, but the tone was unmistakable, casual bragging wrapped in laughter like tinsel around a Christmas tree. I lingered near the edges, letting their voices wash over me. There was Karen, the one who used to scribble in the margins of every notebook. Now she gestured enthusiastically while recounting a promotion that involved a conference in Tokyo. And Mark, whose mischievous grin had once convinced half the class to attempt a daring prank on the biology teacher, now looked meticulously polished in his blazer and crisp shirt, as if he'd been ironed from the inside out. The surreal part was how familiar they were and yet how unrecognizable. It reminded me of scrolling through an old social media feed where everyone's profile pictures have been carefully curated to scream adulthood, while the captions read like boastful haikus about success. I chuckled softly to myself, imagining the internal commentary running in my head as a voiceover. Yes, that is the same person who once tripped over their own backpack in hallway to 103. Progress is magical. I drifted closer, pretending to examine a framed collage of prom photos, though I could hear snippets of conversation like popcorn popping in the background. I overheard someone mention a recent marathon, another person brag about their minimalist apartment, and somewhere, someone dropped the phrase startup success story with a subtle flourish, like an invisible mic drop. It was fascinating, like watching a documentary on lives that had diverged from mine, yet still shared the same opening chapter. The more I observed, the more I realized how disjointed the memory of these people had become in my mind. I remembered their jokes, their quirks, the way they had leaned on each other in class, but now, the energy was different. There was a new rhythm to their interactions, a polished tempo that didn't quite match the chaotic symphony of adolescence. It made me feel like I was dancing to an echo, following a melody I once knew by heart but now only recognized in fragments. I decided to test the waters, offering a polite nod towards someone I thought I recognized from art class. "Hey, it's, Emma, right?" My voice was casual, but inside, my chest fluttered with a mix of excitement and anticipation. She blinked, paused, and then smiled faintly, not with recognition, but with a polite, slightly confused tilt of her head. I bit back a grin. The pause was everything. The universe had given me that delicious gap where time had stretched the familiar into ambiguity. As I lingered near the refreshment table, I noticed subtle tells of recognition or at least curiosity blinking in the peripheries. A glance, a furrowed brow, a slight hesitation in speech. I imagined it as a ripple across a calm pond, small disturbances that hinted at awareness yet hadn't fully broken the surface. My fingers brushed against the rim of my glass, and I let the sensation anchor me, savoring the quiet anticipation like a chocolate slowly melting on the tongue. I remembered the last time I had been in this gymnasium, awkwardly fumbling through the senior prom dance, clumsy in heels and even clumsier in conversation. That version of me would have shrunk in the corner, wishing to become invisible. Now, the irony made me smile. The tables had turned, not through confrontation, but through the subtle authority of self-assured presence. I was no longer the girl who tripped over her own shoelaces. I was a quietly formidable observer, armed with nothing but poise and patience. As the evening sunlight shifted through the hall's windows, the shadows grew longer, brushing across polished floors and shimmering decorations. I let my eyes wander to a few lingering photographs, snapshots of youthful exuberance, captured moments that seemed simultaneously distant and immediate. There was a strange comfort in their stillness, a reminder that while people change, memories retain their shape, like ice cubes melting in a slowly warming glass. I laughed softly to myself, picturing an old classmate asking, "Who's that mysterious person staring at the photos?" And the answer being, of course, the one who doesn't need to be recognized to matter. I moved along, letting small, polite greetings float over me, my presence barely disturbing the air. Occasionally, someone would offer a half smile, a fleeting attempt at conversation, but mostly, I was a ghost among the living echoes of our shared history. It was curious, this space between being seen and being known, and yet, I felt no anger, no desire to force recognition. In fact, I found it oddly soothing. The anonymity offered a strange clarity, a quiet stage upon which the next act could unfold, and I could play it exactly as I chose. By the time I reached the center of the hall, I realized I had absorbed a small pattern, a rhythm of reactions, a tapestry of unspoken questions. The way they tilted their heads when I entered their line of sight, the pauses in conversation as they processed my presence, it was almost hypnotic. I imagined narrating it like an Asmer stream, the subtle scrapes of chairs, the quiet clinking of glasses, the faint buzz of conversations, punctuated by my own soft breaths. Every detail amplified my awareness and, strangely, my amusement. Yes, they had changed, and so had I. But the thrill lay not in confrontation, not in spectacle, but in the quiet accumulation of awareness, the slow unveiling of recognition that hovered on the horizon like the first brushstroke of dawn. My patience, it seemed, was paying off in the most satisfying way. I was invisible, and soon, I would not be. I found myself hovering near a circle of familiar silhouettes, those postures and gestures that my brain insisted it recognized. There was a rhythm to their movements, like characters in a play I had seen 100 times but had forgotten the script for. I leaned casually against the buffet table, letting the hum of conversation wash over me like a soft, slightly irritating lullaby. I sipped my sparkling water, listening for cues, small micro-expressions, the almost imperceptible hitch in a laugh that might signal recognition. Attempting small talk seemed natural at first. "Hi, how's it been?" I asked, my voice deliberately light, carrying a hint of amusement. Silence, not an awkward, cringe-inducing silence, but the kind that stretches and curls around you, tugging at every nerve ending. They exchanged glances, those subtle side-to-side communications that whispered, "Do we know her?" I smiled softly, as though we were all playing a slow-motion game of charades, and I held the winning card quietly against my chest. I tried another approach, mentioning a teacher's name, something I assumed would trigger familiarity. Remember Mrs. Danvers and the way she used to make everyone write book reports on the weekend? A pause, a chuckle, not one of recognition, just a polite acknowledgement of a shared cultural artifact. My words floated in the air, absorbed but not claimed, and I let them linger like the echo of an unplayed note. The more I spoke, the more I realized how disjointed memory had become. These people were familiar yet foreign, snapshots of the past overlaid with layers of adult life they had carefully curated. I chuckled quietly to myself at the thought that some of them had probably Googled my name, or worse, judged the Instagram photos of me that chronicled my quiet, oddly successful adulthood. If looks could cut, their puzzled glances would have been sharp enough to shave a week off my life. Instead, I felt a quiet amusement, an internal applause for the fact that I was still here, fully myself, and utterly unbothered. There was something deliciously theatrical about the silence. Each time I spoke, a subtle shift would ripple through the group, eyebrows raising, a head tilting, the pause before they responded. I imagined it in slow motion, a cinematic reveal of my presence that had nothing to do with shouting, nothing to do with proving, but everything to do with letting them piece it together themselves. It was the quietest, most refined kind of revenge, patience as performance art. I drifted through topics, books, travels, subtle mentions of projects I'd been quietly working on. Each sentence was a brushstroke, painting a picture of a life lived fully beyond their immediate assumptions. I noticed how they hung on to certain words, their eyes flicking up like they were trying to calculate if this was the same person who had once tripped spectacularly over the stage curtain in drama class. The irony tickled me. If only they knew the thrill of watching the reveal unfold from behind my polite smile. At one point, someone tried to engage me directly, asking about my work. I answered with calm confidence, just enough detail to pique curiosity, to stir that subtle acknowledgement that this wasn't the girl they had thought they remembered. Their eyes widened slightly, the polite thought faltering just a fraction. I smiled inwardly, savoring that spark. Recognition, I realized, was a delicate thing, not forced, not demanded, but earned in those tiny, deliciously awkward moments. I allowed myself to drift, letting the rhythm of observation guide me. The hall was alive with murmurs, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. Every detail became amplified: the weight of my own footsteps, the faint fragrance of someone's perfume, the slight rustle of silk dresses and pressed shirts. I imagined it as a cinematic panorama, every small action magnified, as if the room itself were bending to accommodate this quiet, almost imperceptible reveal. I spotted someone who had once been the class clown, now reduced to a tight-lipped smile as they glanced toward me. I chuckled softly, imagining the thought bubble over their head. Wait, do I know her? The humor was not bitter, it was the gentle, teasing amusement of someone watching a well-plotted story unfold, with all the suspense of a good novel slowly revealing its protagonist. The feeling was oddly comforting. I didn't need their immediate recognition. I didn't need applause or dramatic acknowledgement. The space between us, the polite distance, the questions unspoken, the puzzle of my presence was the perfect stage for my own quiet triumph. And as I continued to navigate the room, letting my words flow without hurry, without need, I realized that the icebreaker had already succeeded. The silence wasn't rejection, it was suspense. By the time I moved toward the center again, I had mapped the room in micro gestures: the tilt of a head, the half smile, the fleeting glance toward my direction. Each detail whispered the same thing. They didn't recognize me yet, but something was stirring. My heart didn't race. It floated, buoyed by calm satisfaction. Every word, every movement was part of a dance I had rehearsed in the quiet of my own life for years. And the beauty was, they had no idea they were participants in it. I paused, letting a quiet chuckle escape. Perhaps someone would spill their drink, or trip over their own feet, or say the wrong thing in a conversation. Perhaps not, but that tiny spark, the twitch in an eyebrow, the pause in laughter was enough. Enough to remind me that the most satisfying moments don't require noise. Sometimes, the power is in being quietly, undeniably present, letting the room adjust to you rather than you adjusting to it. And as the soft hum of conversation washed over me once more, I let myself sink into the rhythm. Each silence, each half smile, each puzzled glance was a brushstroke painting the story of my quiet emergence. I didn't need to force it. Recognition was a delicate unfolding, a slow crescendo that I could feel inching ever closer. And in that gentle suspense, I found a peculiar joy, the kind that hums softly beneath the surface, warming every step I took across the polished floor. Memories began to float in like drifting lanterns, small sparks of the past glowing faintly against the unfamiliar backdrop of adult lives. I caught myself smiling at them, not in nostalgia for their sake, but for the strange comfort of recognition my own. I remembered the late-night study sessions in the library, where whispers carried more weight than the books, the clandestine notes passed across desks, and the laughter that could have woken the entire building. That laughter now felt like a faint echo bouncing off walls I barely recognized, a soft ghost hovering just out of reach. A small group gathered near the punch bowl, talking about weekend plans and minor triumphs, unaware of my gaze resting lightly on them. I let my attention drift toward the ceiling, the twinkle of string lights like stars caught in an artificial sky. It reminded me of the night of senior prom, the one I'd spent hiding in a corner, clutching my purse as if it were a shield. The contrast made me smile. Then, I had wished invisibility. Now, invisibility was my instrument, the first act of a performance that required patience more than presence. I wandered slowly toward the photo display on the wall. Each snapshot told a story of youth, awkward grins, uneven prom dresses, haircuts gone tragically wrong. My fingers brushed over the glass frames as though I could touch the past and feel its pulse. The tactile sensation of the cool glass was grounding, a reminder that memory is not only visual, it's physical. It sits in your hands like a pebble collected from a stream, smooth from the constant erosion of time. A chuckle escaped me as I remembered Mrs. Delaney's history class, where I had once argued passionately over the causes of the Industrial Revolution, only to be told, "Young lady, your imagination is impressive, but let's stick to the textbook." I could see that same fervor reflected faintly in some of my old classmates' faces now, though polished and tempered by careers and responsibilities. It struck me how those tiny sparks of youthful intensity had evolved into quiet achievements and subtle triumphs, some visible, some hidden beneath the surface. Someone brushed past me, a familiar scent of jasmine and sandalwood mingling with the ambient aroma of punch and hors d'oeuvres. I caught a fleeting glance at a former friend, now clearly someone I no longer truly knew, yet there was a ripple of memory in the corners of their eyes. It made me pause just for a moment to consider how time transforms even the closest connections. It was a strange, bittersweet feeling, the kind that nestles at the base of your throat and warms your chest with a gentle heat. I returned to the center of the hall, letting my gaze wander over clusters of conversation. Each laugh, each slight tilt of the head, every subtle gesture, became part of a tapestry I was quietly observing. I imagined a voiceover, soft and intimate, like the gentle narration in an ASMR video. They are here, yet not entirely. They are fragments of a world you once inhabited, familiar but reshaped by the years. Watch, listen, breathe. You are present. You are steady. You are exactly where you belong. The realization struck me softly. I wasn't just observing. I was participating in a ritual of rediscovery, a slow unfolding of awareness. The ice had yet to break fully, but cracks were forming, tiny fissures that promised recognition without confrontation. I let myself be still, allowing the subtle currents of the room to inform my presence, shaping it with gentle confidence rather than force. There was a peculiar satisfaction in being known without being seen, in letting their curiosity build quietly, naturally, like steam rising from a cup of tea on a cold morning. I drifted closer to the dessert table, the soft clink of utensils and murmurs blending into a soothing cadence. I picked up a small chocolate tart, letting the sweet, slightly bitter taste linger on my tongue. Humor bubbled quietly beneath the surface. Who would have thought that a reunion could feel like both a battlefield and a spa day, the tension melting into pleasure as slowly as chocolate on a warm tongue? I smiled to myself, imagining the inner thought of some unsuspecting classmate. Wait, is she? That tiny flicker of uncertainty was delicious in its subtlety, a quiet affirmation that patience often triumphs over haste. A glance toward a familiar figure, a classmate who once ruled the social hierarchy with a perfectly executed grin, revealed a subtle shift. Their attention, momentarily captured by my presence, lingered just a fraction too long before flitting elsewhere. I suppressed a chuckle. Recognition, I realized, was a gentle crescendo, not a sudden explosion. Each pause, each hesitation, each flicker of understanding was a note in a symphony that was just beginning to play. The room felt alive with unspoken questions, the weight of histories unclaimed mingling with the soft glow of string lights and chandeliers. Every whispered remark, every polite smile, every sideways glance contributed to the quiet narrative unfolding around me. I inhaled slowly, letting the warm scent of cinnamon from a nearby candle coil around my senses, grounding me in the moment. There was an odd serenity in the dissonance, a quiet thrill in the gentle stirrings of recognition that had yet to fully bloom. I let myself wander, a soft observer in a world both familiar and foreign. Each memory that floated past, each laugh or tilt of the head, each fleeting glance, became a brushstroke in the portrait of the evening. I could feel the pulse of the room, subtle but insistent, a rhythm that matched the quiet thrill building inside me. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a stage, and I had all the time in the world to reveal my presence, one small, satisfying beat at a time. I felt it then, the subtle spark of recognition, like the first tiny flicker of a candle in a dim room. I hadn't announced myself. I hadn't drawn attention with any dramatic flair. I simply spoke, a casual remark about a shared high school experience, and something shifted. Someone's eyes, previously glazed in polite ambiguity, brightened just enough to betray a flicker of memory. A tiny smile tugged at the corner of their lips, hesitant, questioning. That moment fleeting as it was felt like stepping onto a hidden balcony overlooking a city of long-buried histories. It began with subtle cues, a slightly longer glance, a pause in conversation as heads turned just a fraction toward me, the gentle arch of an eyebrow. The world hadn't changed, they had. And yet, they were beginning to see me again, the version of me that had once roamed hallways with awkward confidence and sharp humor, now tempered and layered with quiet achievements. Recognition doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers in microseconds, in the almost imperceptible flicker of memory across someone's eyes. I let my words flow freely, recounting a minor anecdote from an old club we had all attended. The story was innocuous, humorous, wrapped in self-deprecating charm. And yet, the effect was immediate. A few jaws relaxed, a small laugh erupted, and I sensed the recognition solidifying not just as memory, but as acknowledgement of who I had become. Their eyes searched mine, piecing together the gaps, reconciling the ghost of their high school peer with the present standing before them. The subtle thrill of it washed over me, a gentle rush that tickled the back of my neck and made my fingertips tingle. Someone leaned in, clearly trying to mask their curiosity. "Wait, is that really you?" Their voice carried a mixture of surprise, delight, and perhaps a touch of embarrassment for having not realized sooner. I smiled, letting the moment linger just long enough to savor it. Recognition, after all, is not about confrontation, it's about revelation. And revelation, when delivered softly, feels infinitely more satisfying than any dramatic showdown. I moved gracefully through the room, each interaction a small victory. The sparks of recognition were subtle but cumulative, a head tilt here, a widening of eyes there, a barely audible murmur of astonishment at a detail I casually mentioned about my life. I noticed how the initial silence, once a source of slight tension, had transformed into a canvas, each flicker of awareness painting a story of my quiet ascent. The irony wasn't lost on me. I hadn't needed to shout or boast. Their own curiosity, paired with my composed presence, did all the work. There was laughter now, genuine, and directed my way, mingling with polite applause for minor stories I recounted. I caught someone nudging their friend, whispering, likely saying, "Is that really her?" Their incredulity was delicious, not cruel, but the sort of astonishment that comes from realizing the world has quietly moved forward while you were oblivious to its subtle choreography. I chuckled softly to myself, imagining the inner monologues running through the room, each mind piecing together fragments of memory, comparing them against the reality in front of them. It was fascinating, this dance of perception and revelation. Recognition doesn't demand drama. It thrives in patience, in the gentle unfolding of presence. I could see it now, the polite smiles becoming more genuine, the conversations opening up in ways they hadn't before, the once invisible threads of connection weaving themselves back into the fabric of our interactions. The room felt less like a reunion and more like a stage for subtle rediscovery, and I was both observer and protagonist in the quiet symphony. I lingered at the edge of a small circle, recounting a shared memory from sophomore year that I had long assumed forgotten. A laugh, soft but sincere, confirmed the spark of recognition had caught fire. Eyes met mine with a hint of wonder, as if they were measuring the space between past and present, assessing the distance I had traveled without even needing to announce it. It felt almost luxurious, this slow unveiling, the power in letting them come to the realization on their own. A few subtle gestures, an incredulous shake of a head, a playful roll of the eyes were like punctuation marks in the narrative of my return to their awareness. I caught myself smiling, a small, quiet grin that carried no malice, only the gentle satisfaction of seeing the room acknowledge me without a single raised voice or dramatic reveal. This was recognition in its purest form, understated, intimate, and deeply gratifying. As the evening shadows lengthened and the string lights cast a warm glow across the hall, I allowed myself to savor the moment. The first spark of recognition had become a flickering flame, and I felt its warmth against the subtle cool of the polished floors beneath my feet. There was no need for grand gestures, no need for spectacle. The room was awake now, slowly, quietly, and I, calm, observant, and gently amused, was finally seen. The shift in the room was subtle, like the first breath of wind that makes chimes tinkle softly on a summer evening. I could feel it in the way conversations paused mid-laugh, the slight pivot of bodies toward me, and the tiny hesitations and gestures that had previously flowed without regard. Whispers had begun, low and almost conspiratorial, threading their way around me without ever being fully voiced. I could sense curiosity mingled with disbelief, like a gentle hum vibrating through the polished floorboards. A glance to my left caught someone leaning slightly forward, eyes narrowing in an attempt to reconcile my presence with the hazy memory of the girl they once knew. It was amusing, the quiet calculations taking place behind polite smiles. I imagined thought bubbles forming over every head. Wait, didn't she used to? And is this really her? The very air seemed to ripple with their unspoken questions. I could almost feel the collective brain power in the room stretching, bending to accommodate this unexpected puzzle. I wandered closer to a small group discussing weekend trips and job promotions, letting my words drift in as I casually referenced a shared memory of a school trip. There was a pause, subtle but distinct, as if the world had briefly slowed to allow their minds to catch up. One by one, faces tilted, eyes widened slightly, lips parting in recognition that hadn't been there before. Their initial shock wasn't dramatic, it was a delicate, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that whispered rather than shouted. It struck me how easily the room's energy could be measured through micro-expressions, a raised brow, a subtle nod, the half-smile that quivered between disbelief and delight. Each gesture was a signal, a ripple of acknowledgement that passed through the crowd like a soft wave. I felt like a conductor of an invisible orchestra, guiding recognition with nothing more than calm presence and gentle conversation. There was no need to force attention. The room itself was gradually bending toward awareness. As I stood near the refreshment table, watching someone reach for a can-app, I noticed their hand pause mid-air, eyes darting subtly in my direction. The faintest quirk of a smile, almost imperceptible, betrayed the realization forming in their mind. I suppressed a quiet chuckle, enjoying the delicate satisfaction of letting them piece it together themselves. This wasn't revenge, it was discovery, an organic unfolding that no one could rush or orchestrate. And that made it far sweeter than any confrontation ever could be. A few conversations nearby became punctuated by my presence. Whispers of curiosity floated through the air. Do you think that's really her? And she looks so different. The room was alive with subtle tension, a gentle curiosity that filled the space without chaos. I moved with calm assurance, smiling gently at those who now dared to engage. The moments of eye contact were brief but meaningful, each one a confirmation that my quiet strategy was working. Recognition was building, layer by layer, without drama, without spectacle. I could sense their minds working, parsing the details I offered, comparing my words and demeanor to faint memories, connecting dots long forgotten. Someone asked a question about a project I had quietly completed over the years, and as I answered, the flicker of surprise grew more pronounced. They weren't just recognizing me, they were reassessing, reevaluating the girl they had once known, now standing confidently, calmly, in the same room. Their curiosity was a warm current brushing against my senses, subtle and thrilling in its understated power. Even as whispers circled and glances lingered, I remained steady, letting recognition arrive on its own terms. There was something quietly intoxicating about the room's gradual surrender to awareness. The way unspoken questions circled and connected like constellations forming a pattern for the first time in a decade. Each flicker of realization was a soft applause, invisible yet profoundly satisfying. By the time I moved toward another small cluster of classmates, I could feel the tide shifting in my favor. Their curiosity was no longer tentative, it was engaged, active, eager even. I smiled softly, a tiny, almost imperceptible curl of the lips that carried no malice, only amusement and quiet pride. The unspoken judgments and questions that had hovered like a gentle haze were now sharpening into recognition, acknowledgement, and an undeniable curiosity about who I had become. It was exquisite, this slow dance of awareness. I didn't have to assert myself, didn't have to proclaim victories or boast of accomplishments. All I needed was presence, patience, and the subtle timing of a story told lightly. The room had shifted imperceptibly, the undercurrent of curiosity now a palpable energy, a soft hum vibrating in the air, signaling that the narrative had begun to turn. And in that moment, I felt a quiet thrill, an intimate satisfaction that came not from confrontation, but from the gentle, deliberate unfolding of recognition. I decided it was time to lean fully into the subtle crescendo I had been orchestrating with patience and quiet amusement. Each glance, each tentative question, each flicker of recognition had paved the way for this moment, and I felt the satisfaction of a well-timed reveal thrumming under my skin. I spoke a little more confidently now, letting anecdotes slip naturally into conversation's small victories, humorous misadventures, quiet successes I had cultivated over the years. Every story was carefully measured, light enough to entertain, substantial enough to intrigue, and always with a soft smile that suggested, without claiming, yes, I am still here, and yes, I have grown. I could see their expressions shift subtly, the initial shock giving way to interest, then curiosity, then the faintest trace of admiration. Recognition, when delivered without fanfare, is almost imperceptible at first. A slight widening of eyes, a pause in mid-gesture, a barely audible intake of breath, these tiny cues are more powerful than overt acknowledgement. I had become a living puzzle, and the room had finally begun to bend itself around the solution. Somewhere in the center of the hall, a cluster of former friends leaned in, a blend of cautious excitement and polite hesitation coloring their movements. They asked questions now, not the perfunctory kind, but ones that sought detail, connection, and clarity. I shared, with gentle humor, a story about an art project that had quietly received recognition in a local gallery. The subtle astonishment in their eyes, the way their mouths twitched with suppressed smiles, made the moment feel like an intimate performance, one in which they were discovering my presence in real time. There was a strange beauty in watching them reconstruct their memories, piece by piece, aligning the girl they thought they knew with the woman standing before them. It wasn't arrogance or triumph that motivated me, it was the thrill of subtle revelation, the quiet authority of being truly, unassailably present. Their reactions were a dance, and I, relaxed yet fully engaged, led with the faintest nod, the softest laugh, the calmest confidence. I noticed a familiar classmate, once the self-proclaimed queen of social maneuvering, trying to maintain composure while her mind clearly worked overtime. Recognition, I realized, has a way of disarming even the most practiced expressions of confidence. Her initial polite smile had softened into genuine interest, her laughter flowing more naturally as I recounted a humorous memory from our senior year. I let the moment breathe, allowing her astonishment and delight to simmer just beneath the surface, enjoying the intimate rhythm of the unfolding narrative. The room, once indifferent, now hummed with gentle curiosity and renewed engagement. Conversations had shifted toward me organically. I didn't have to force attention or seek validation. The recognition was arriving on its own terms, like sunlight filtering softly through curtains on a lazy afternoon. I allowed myself a soft inward chuckle. How perfect it was that my presence, previously ignored, now commanded subtle notice simply by being calm, composed, and unapologetically myself. I moved among small groups, letting my stories weave quietly into their conversations. Each interaction reinforced the sense of discovery, the careful assembling of a puzzle they hadn't realized they were piecing together. I shared humorous, self-deprecating anecdotes about my career, subtly peppered with the lessons learned, the triumphs quietly earned, and the journeys undertaken. Their reactions, a tilted head, a lifted brow, a soft laugh, were all small confirmations that the recognition I had cultivated with patience was now solidifying into something tangible. The thrill of seeing them reconcile memory and reality was unexpectedly comforting. Recognition, I realized, isn't a matter of ego or revenge, it's a delicate, intimate art. To witness it unfold naturally, without forcing, without confrontation, carries a satisfaction that shouts louder than any dramatic gesture. I savored the subtle astonishment, the delicate balance of surprise and admiration, letting each moment linger just enough to imprint quietly into the evening's rhythm. As the hours passed, the reunion became less about awkward silence and more about a shared narrative in which I had quietly claimed my space. Their curiosity had transformed into engagement, their polite distance into active listening, and each acknowledgement, however small, became a thread in the tapestry of my gentle triumph. I felt a serene joy in watching the slow bloom of awareness, the quiet unraveling of assumptions, and the soft weaving of recognition. By the time I finally stepped back, surveying the room, I felt a satisfying hum settle over me. I had become visible on my own terms, quietly observed, gently celebrated, without any need for theatrics or forceful assertion. The crescendo of the evening had arrived, subtle yet profound, and I moved through it with the calm amusement of someone who knows that true presence does not demand attention, it invites it, naturally, quietly, and memorably. The night began to wind down, the soft glow of string lights casting elongated shadows across the polished floors, and I could feel the room's energy shifting from excitement to a calm, satisfied hum. Recognition had fully blossomed now, subtle yet unmistakable, and the initial shock that had painted so many faces had softened into genuine curiosity and engagement. I moved among them one last time, letting casual laughter and soft anecdotes flow effortlessly from my lips, tasting the sweetness of quiet triumph without needing to gloat. I caught sight of a few classmates clustered by the exit, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and admiration. One of them whispered something to another, and I imagined the words, "She's really done it. She's completely changed." I smiled to myself, the sound of soft chuckles bubbling quietly in my chest. The thrill wasn't in proving anything, but in watching the gentle unraveling of assumptions, the way they now saw me as a fully realized person, distinct yet undeniably connected to the girl they remembered. As I made my way toward the door, the hall felt more intimate, warmer somehow. The soft clinks of glasses, murmured goodbyes, and fading laughter formed a gentle symphony, like the closing measures of a lullaby. I lingered for a moment near the photo wall, tracing a finger lightly over a familiar prom snapshot, letting memories rise and settle in a calm rhythm. The nostalgia was no longer bittersweet. It was soft, comforting, like a well-worn blanket folded neatly across my shoulders. I could feel the satisfaction of the evening humming in my bones, a quiet pulse of accomplishment that required no applause. I hadn't needed revenge. Their initial silence, their gradual curiosity, their tentative acknowledgement had been enough. Standing there, I realized the quietest victories are often the most profound, unfolding gently without force, their resonance lingering like a soft echo long after the room empties. I let myself chuckle softly, imagining one of them thinking, "She's always been clever, hasn't she?" Stepping out into the night air, I inhaled deeply, the crisp breeze brushing against my face like a gentle reminder that life continues beyond recognition and reunions. Streetlights glinted faintly on wet pavement, and distant laughter from late-night pedestrians mingled with the faint hum of the city. I walked slowly, savoring the calm thrill that comes from having been fully seen without drama, fully acknowledged without spectacle. The world felt expansive, quiet, and yet intensely alive, as if every step I took carried the soft resonance of a life lived intentionally. I thought about the evening's conversations, the subtle gestures, the moments of pause and flickers of awareness. Each interaction had been a brushstroke, painting a canvas of rediscovery and gentle revelation. I let the images of familiar faces, now softened by recognition, float through my mind like drifting clouds, each one a tiny story, a quiet triumph, a whispered victory. The room behind me had grown still, its energy settling into an easy, contented cadence, leaving me with a lingering sense of harmony and calm satisfaction. Even as I walked away, the echoes of soft laughter and tentative acknowledgement followed me like a gentle trail of warmth. I smiled, letting the quiet amusement and satisfaction rise and fall with each step. Recognition, I realized, is a subtle art. It doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't demand drama. It is discovered, cultivated, and revealed in increments. And when it arrives naturally, its sweetness lingers long after the moment itself has passed. By the time I reached the quiet street, the city's soft hum a comforting companion, I allowed myself a final breath of reflection. The reunion had been more than a gathering. It had been a stage, a canvas, a slow, deliberate performance in which I had moved with patience, grace, and quiet confidence. The satisfaction I felt now was not in others' astonishment alone, but in the calm certainty of my own presence, the gentle thrill of being fully realized, fully acknowledged, without ever needing to demand it. I lingered for a moment beneath a lamppost, letting the soft glow bathe my face, and whispered to myself, almost in a lullaby, "You were here all along. And now, they finally see you." The night wrapped around me like a velvet blanket, carrying the soft resonance of gentle victories and quiet satisfaction. The night softened around me, the city lights casting gentle pools of gold on the pavement. Every sound seemed muted, as if the world itself were exhaling a distant car hum, a soft rustle of leaves, footsteps echoing faintly in the empty street. I let each breath settle slowly, feeling it drift through my chest, down into my toes, and back up again, a quiet rhythm that matched the calm of the evening. The reunion, with all its subtle revelations, was behind me now, leaving a tender echo of satisfaction that lingered like the soft hum of a lullaby. I allowed my mind to wander over the moments that had unfolded, the flickers of recognition, the gentle surprises, the tiny smiles and widened eyes that had acknowledged me without needing any dramatic gestures. Each memory felt like a feather drifting in slow motion, light and delicate, yet entirely mine to hold. I imagined letting them settle one by one, softening into the quiet spaces between heartbeats, leaving a trail of warmth and amusement behind. The air was cool against my skin, brushing over my arms like a soft caress, and I felt my shoulders release the tension they hadn't realized they were holding. I let my thoughts slow, circling gently around the laughter, the soft hum of conversations, the fleeting moments of eye contact that had revealed more than words ever could. Each sensation was magnified in its softness: the gentle crunch of my shoes on the sidewalk, the faint scent of night jasmine, the whisper of wind against my face, and I allowed myself to sink fully into it. I imagined a soft, glowing thread connecting each fleeting memory, each subtle triumph, each quiet revelation, weaving them together into a gentle tapestry that hummed with satisfaction. The world around me seemed to blur at the edges, every light softening, every sound dimming, leaving only the warmth of presence and the slow, soothing rhythm of breathing. I could feel the quiet pride, the calm amusement, the gentle joy of having been seen on my own terms, settling deep and steady. With each step, I let my body and mind release the remnants of the evening, feeling them dissolve like sugar in warm tea. My heart, once pulsing with anticipation and subtle thrill, now beat a steady, lullaby-like rhythm. I whispered softly to myself, letting the words trail off like a gentle sigh. It's enough. You are enough. You have always been enough. The night stretched around me, soft and expansive, carrying the echoes of laughter and recognition far into the distance. I let my gaze drift upward, imagining the stars scattered across the sky, each one a soft punctuation in the quiet story of the evening. And as the world settled into a gentle hush, I felt the warmth of satisfaction and calm wrap around me, a gentle lullaby in every beat, a soft promise of rest and peace. I whispered one last time, letting the sound dissolve into the night. Sleep well. You were seen, and you were enough, and in that tender, lingering moment, everything faded softly, peacefully, as the night embraced me completely.